Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Trap Draw podcast. My name is Randy, and this is one of my favorite episodes to do. I am talking to Christopher Clarey. He is a tennis writer, and he is out with a new book, The Warrior, Rafael Nadal and His Kingdom of Clay. You might remember I talked to Christopher a couple years ago on the Trap Draw about another book of his called The Master, all about Roger Federer. Well, he's back with a new one, and you guys know I love tennis and have just been looking forward to this conversation. It's a wonderful book. I hope you'll enjoy it. Before we dive into the interview, though, let me thank our title sponsor for the Trap Draw. That's, of course, our good friends at ServPro. ServPro is the number one brand in cleanup and restoration and is known for making any mess like it never even happened. With over 22 locations nationwide, they're faster to any size disaster. They have over 50 years of experience helping people recover from disasters. Trust me, you don't want to have to use ServPro, but there's going to come a time where you need them. And so just remember ServPro, all right? They're there to help 24/7. Just call 1-800-ServPro or go and visit servpro.com today. Again, they're going to make that mess like it never even happened. Well, what did happen is my interview with Christopher Clarey. So let's get to that right now. And what a pleasure to have him back on the Trap Draw podcast. It is Christopher Clarey. We had him on a few years ago to talk about his New York Times bestselling book, The Master, The Long Run and Beautiful Game of Roger Federer. And he's back now today to talk about his newest book called The Warrior, Rafael Nadal in His Kingdom of Clay. It is available for sale May 13th. I assume nationwide, internationally. So definitely, as we get a week or so out from the French Open, definitely check this book out. Just by a bit of background, Christopher Clarey's been covering Grand Slam tennis tournaments since I believe 1990. That would make this 35 years. Been a longtime correspondent for the New York Times and International Herald Tribune. And also, Chris, if you don't mind, in 2018, I want to recognize you received the Eugene L. Scott Award from the International Tennis Hall of Fame, a career prize awarded for communicating honestly and critically about the game and for making a significant impact on the tennis world. That is an awesome honor, and I am honored to have you back. Welcome to the Trap Draw. How are you today?
Phil, great to see you. Really, always a pleasure. I have great memories of you grilling me the last couple of times and testing my knowledge, and I'm not sure I passed, but it was fun to try.
Well, since that conversation, I've been eagerly awaiting the release of your new book. I got an advance copy. I've made my way entirely through it. It was I just loved it. And so
That's great.
really have looked forward to this conversation. I was thinking about a good place to start, Christopher, and I want to read a quote. This comes from page 4. I want to read a quote to you. You say, quote, to explore Nadal properly, it feels like you need to follow his lead by sweating and suffering, going the extra mile, even on your off days. As I wrote this book, I was drawn Rafa style to rituals, early morning walks, coffee, grinding, deep breathing to keep my mind off the finish line. There is method acting. This is method writing. And the more you learn about Nadal, the more you don't want it to come easily, don't want it without problems to solve and heavy brush to clear. And I mean, I feel like on page 4, you kind of give us what is the thesis, or at least, gosh, if you can boil Rafael Nadal, the competitor, down into, a few sentences, I feel like that's it. I was just hoping if you could talk about this method writing and really how much did you feel that as you were writing this book?
I'm thinking that's news we can all use, right? That's the way it is, right?
Yes.
How are you going to find something that you can relate to in the book? Because we sure can't relate to his 14 French Open titles for sure. But no, it's funny because as you said, I did the book on Federer before, and I think the Rafa style grinding on this one was I didn't want it to be similar in format. I didn't really want it to be similar in challenge. And honestly, Phil, I wouldn't have written it if I didn't feel like I had a different way of going at it. I'm really happy that you liked it. It makes me really happy to hear. I haven't had a lot of direct feedback on the book yet, so it's really special to hear that. But I felt like when I thought about man in the place, or man in the substance of clay, and the place being Roland Garros and the French Open, that was kind of the way in for me. Instead of having it be Rafa's life from the early stage to the end of his career in kind of a linear fashion, I really felt like I wanted to make it maybe Rafa style, more complicated and more challenging, and certainly having that dual structure of the place and the man made it so. But I really kept my interest and kept me focused, and it was challenging to figure out the structure and the method there. So I guess in that sense, absolutely. And as you well know, writing any book of any depth or substance is a challenge. I'm a print journalist at heart. I'm used to my daily feedback, my daily endorphin rush from people saying yay or nay on your article on social media or whatever. And this is just a long gestation period, 2 years to get this thing out. So that's also a big challenge. And you cannot be into short term gratification, which is kind of the way Nadal operates. So I really tried to get in the mindset. And I'm so glad you picked that out, because that really summed up a lot of my time writing this book.
And when did you know? Because as you said, you didn't want to just write it to write it, but talk to me about the process of when you knew you had enough, and the style and the way you went about writing. I guess how long of a process was it for this book from idea to now? Obviously we're close to the publish date.
Yeah, I mean, I'm no John Feinstein. I haven't written dozens, scores of books. Rest in peace. What a great productive career he had, and so much on golf and tennis and so many subjects. But this is my second big book. But I feel like if I have a lot of different tangents, something that I can individually bring from my own experience and my own reporting over the years, and my own really passionate interest, that's where it all kind of comes together for me. And I had so much access to Nadal, especially when he was young. I lived in Spain as he was emerging. I've lived in France because my wife is French, off and on throughout a lot of my adult life. I speak the languages. Tennis is a sport that I know best. And honestly, Roland Garros is the Grand Slam and probably the sports event that I know best. I've covered it over 30 times. I know all the ins and outs of it. And so all those things together, I just felt like it was just too many points of confluence. I kind of owed it to myself to and exercise myself of all these things, and get it out there. And I think that's kind of what it comes down to for me, is what if I feel I have enough things where I can really bring my own point of view and really add value, then that's when I want to do it. And so that's obviously people will go, well, he wrote about Federer. Of course, he's going to write about Nadal. In some ways, this book is more logical for me to write based on my own life experience than the Federer book was. And I've said to my family, I mean, I think what I would have regretted the most at the end of my career if I hadn't written was a book about Roland Garros, to be honest. Not
Yeah.
the most commercial thing or the most direct idea to the public. I think to have Nadal as the way to structure both Nadal's career and the history of Roland Garros was a great way to do it. But that's the thing. I mean, I kind of grew up as a sports writer internationally at the French Open. I mean, I covered it since '91 every year. We used to live a few blocks behind the tournament. And so I just really felt like if I didn't do it or somebody else did it, I was going to really have a hard time. So you don't want to do it out of a negative emotion, but maybe there's a little bit of Nadal in that too. You kind of like the grind and like the fight of it. But I knew I wanted to write about Roland Garros, and as Nadal emerged, I started thinking about it quite a long time ago that I would love to put them together in some way.
Well, and that's what I was gonna compliment you on too, much like your book about Roger Federer, which it went in a lot of different fun directions. That's what I love about this book as well. Obviously, it's all centered around Rafael Nadal, but you go into the details of what a clay tennis court actually is, and how it gets constructed. You go into the history of Roland Garros, the French Open, the French championships going back to the late 19th century. And also you have a lot of interesting kind of branches off into just broad tennis topics. Your Bjorn Borgs and your Yannick Noahs, and kind of the progression of Spanish tennis stars. This book, I want to emphasize to people, whether you're a Rafa fan or not. I mean, I don't know how you couldn't be, or at least recognize his greatness. The book is a lot more than simply, as you said earlier, like, here's his childhood, here's his adulthood. Here, it's not just a linear biography. And I really like that, Christopher. So with those kind of topics all in play, I was hoping to, maybe tease them. I always struggle with, like, obviously people haven't read the book at large, so I don't give away your best stuff. I'll leave that to your discretion. But I feel like we should start with Rafael Nadal, the man, the competitor. And I guess my first question, I just found it fascinating. If you could kind of speak to the juxtaposition of who he is on the court and as a competitor, I thought was really interesting compared to who he is more in his private life and away from the court, because they're not exactly the same person. And I think that, I don't know if surprise is the right word, but it was just interesting kind of seeing different personas, I guess, on court versus off court.
Yeah, I mean, I think Rafa, above all, is an anchored person. He's a grounded person. Not all pro athletes, especially a lot of pro tennis players, are pulled out of their roots at a very early age, and they are required to sacrifice a lot in terms of family continuity and their own sort of threads in their lives to make it. And especially so many of them from Eastern Europe have had to come to Florida or now Spain and train. And you see within the United States too, where people are having to be pulled to the academies. A guy like Andre Agassi, couldn't stay in Vegas, and even though everything's supposed to stay in Vegas, but he couldn't stay in Vegas, and he ended up having to go to Florida to make it. And Pete Sampras also had to make some moves and changes. So it's part of this fabric of the sport. What's interesting about Rafa is he didn't have to do that, and his parents and his uncle Tony, were able to make that choice and be able to keep him home in Mallorca, which is a pretty nice place. I mean, I've visited it a few times now and seen where he grew up, and it's a fairly idyllic spot, and I think it really anchors him, and I think in that community, in that environment where there's so much trust and support for him, he's fully 100% Rafa. But there's also that side of, honestly, that killer side of Rafa where, the bandana goes on and the kangaroo jumps happen and the samurai armor is put on and he does kind of don this warrior mentality. And I don't like, war references. I think sports overdoes that, but I think in the case of Rafa, the title really works because I think that's the persona that he has developed over time, and I think it's probably just as real as the good buddy in Mallorca hanging out with his friends playing golf and competing. Rafa is a competitor, like so many great tennis players and great athletes. The competition is part of the DNA, so maybe that's a common thread. I mean, I think if he's playing Parcheesi, his favorite board game, which is there's addicted to with everybody, he wants to win it every time, and he's a kind of an ugly golfer. He's not pretty to watch, but he gets it done and he's close to scratch and he loves to compete. So that part's a common thread, but just sort of the more exuberant, easy access. There's more humor in Rafa than we would suspect. I mean, that's one thing about his tennis career that I always have noticed. There's not a lot of mirth in it, not a lot of deviation from the task. It's pretty poker face, pretty serious stuff. But I think when he gets away, Rafa can be quite funny. People are always surprised by that. In his native language, which I've been able to interview him in. He is much more expansive. I'd say fun. He's more kind of Tao of Rafa in English, sort of snippets and short little pieces of philosophy, or honestly, still a bit of broken English. But in Spanish, he's got more gravitas, but he can also branch out. So there is that duality in Nadal for sure. And look at his life. I mean, he's really anchored with his people. He's had some changes in his team, but it's always kind of replacing Mallorcan with Mallorcan, people from that same community. And that's quite unusual for a great athlete all through their career to be able to remain as local as that and yet be as global as Rafa became.
And uh, thank you for clarity, because I probably worded that prior question not the best in saying he's a different person on and off the court. But I guess more what I was trying to not very eloquently get at was for somebody who is as competitive and has been as dominating and you could say ruthless on the tennis court. I guess it's just very surprising to read how humble and
Mm,
gracious and I guess that's the difference. I was more just taken by, I guess,
mm.
in him.
That's a really good point, and you're right. That is a big thread in the book and a big thread in his life. I mean, Rafa was raised right. I guess you can put it that way. He was raised in a pretty small town of Manacor. He was raised in the center of the city, very near the main cathedral there, or the main basilica, whatever it is. So I think, basically he opened his door as a kid, and he opened up and he's out in the village. Hey, Rafa, he's have to, greet the guy who makes the bread, greet the guy who cleans the streets, greets the guy who runs the church. So very anchored in that community. So it's a very respectful, social, and also Mallorca is a place where pretension is not rewarded. You definitely are brought to your down a bit, brought down a peg. People who are, you are wealthy and successful, but you're not going to flaunt it, and you're also not going to forget, where you come from, and that you might do a cool job, but you're still a Mallorcan like the Mallorcans. So there's that kind of grounding in a bit of equality there, I think, as part of the island mentality. And then I think it was just Tony and Rafa's parents, but particularly Tony, who was his coach and has first hit with Rafa when Rafa was 3, and is really the main reason Rafa is a tennis player instead of a soccer player. I think if Tony hadn't been a tennis player in that family, there was no chance Rafa wasn't going to play soccer. Just based on his uncle's success, Miguel Angel was a star with the Spanish national team in Barcelona and a Mallorcan club, and was a great player. And I think Rafa really was more drawn to soccer than tennis, but Tony changed that destiny. And Tony was a taskmaster and was somebody who was very big on pleases and thank yous, and thanking people for the effort that they're making. And I think the earlier that happens in your life, Phil, as we all know, I mean, that's when things happen. You get that sort of anchored thing, and Rafa definitely had that, and I think it carried
Mm.
over. And honestly, I tried hard to find people who would talk him down and tell me some horrible story about him blowing off the courtesy car driver, or pushing back the peas on the plates of the restaurant worker. But there aren't stories like that. The guy has had a pretty clean sheet in that regard, and it's impressive. And I think it is a big change, because when that bandana goes on and the warrior starts, he's not going to cheat, but he's gonna run over you, with great gusto and great pleasure to compete. Not so much beat
Yeah.
you, but as get the best out of himself. And if you're in the way, I'm sorry, but that's the way it's going to be. So you're right. There is that duality, and it is an interesting one. He's a lot of gentleness in Rafa, a lot of empathy. Federer is a bit like this too, but Federer doesn't project that same warrior mentality on court that Rafa does. So it is a big contrast.
Yeah. You mentioned his uncle Tony Nadal, who is plays a hugely important role in not only his upbringing, but getting into tennis, and as his career progresses, the career is just amazing. We are now post career for Rafa. He is officially retired, and I guess let me ask you the question, Christopher. What is the stat of all stats in your opinion when it comes to Rafael Nadal, the tennis player?
I mean, one of the reasons I wrote the book was 14 French Opens is just insane. I mean, it really is. But if you want to if you want to expand on that a
Yeah,
little bit, you got, 14 French Opens, 12 Barcelona Opens, 11 Monte Carlo Opens, and 10 Italian Opens. So that's kind of that quartet there, all double digits. When double digits for anybody in one tournament would have been considered pretty insane. I mean, Martina Navratilova, one of the greats of the greats, got to 9 Wimbledon titles in singles. And Rafa did, 4 different tournaments getting double digits, including the most important one with 14. And the record before that was 6 for the men. Bjorn Borg was a pretty fair tennis player on clay, and he got to 6, and Rafa got to 14. So, and everybody else in Rafa's generation, because of him, he got to 3 or 2 or 1. So it's just that number is phenomenal, and I do think, unless human lifespans and health spans double in the next 50 to 100 years, which I guess is possible, we're not going to see anybody else doing that. And it took a perfect storm, as Emilio Sanchez Vicario, one of the great Spanish tennis players before Rafa, said. The mentality, the training, the surface, the philosophy, it all came together to create this amazing number of 14. And that's, I wanted people at the end of the book to understand how the heck it happened, and really kind of what the ingredients were to that. And hopefully at maybe 20, 25 years down the road, if somebody wonders how did Rafa get to 14, they can find out from reading The Warrior. And it is a phenomenal thing. But there are other stats. One other thing I think is interesting and worth pointing out is Rafa in this book is obviously very clay focused, because that's where he was at his absolute best, arguably the best tennis player of all time on any surface, which is quite a statement. But I do think it's important to say he did win 8 majors in singles on other surfaces than clay. And so even without the clay, he would have been a Hall of Famer twice over. 8 is Andre Agassi territory. It's Ivan Lendl territory. It's one more than John McEnroe. So, I mean, it's even without the clay, amazing player. But with the clay, just in the stratosphere. And, all the more credit to Novak Djokovic for having 2 more majors in the end than Rafael Nadal, or maybe he'll get to more than 2. But I just think it's important. My goal in writing this was not to, confine Rafa to a clay court corridor. It was just to show you what an outlier he was on that surface and how he and the place melded together.
Well, you kind of hinted at what I was going to get to next, which is just the perfect storm of him, his upbringing, his circumstance, his athleticism, his left-handedness, how that translates to clay, et cetera, et cetera. But could you try as best you can in a short amount of time? I mean, that's why the book's 330 some pages. What is it specifically in that alchemy that made Rafa so dominant on clay? Just speaking to, what is it about the technique? How best can you sum up why he is so dominant?
Well, technically, I think you have to go with movement. I mean, grass is very particular in tennis, but clay is slippery, gritty, and the movement's different on clay than anything else because you really have to be able to shift directions and time your sliding or not slide it at all. People think you're sliding constantly. Well, you're not sliding constantly, and be able to navigate the surface, kind of like the Spanish use the verb patinar for sliding on clay, which is skating. So there's a lot of similarities. It's like a sheet of ice out there, and you have to know how the heck to navigate it. So that's job one on clay. And Rafa, because of his early connection with the surface, it was across the street from his family's home. They had a couple different homes in Manacor when he was growing up. One of them was right across the street from the tennis club where he started, which is all clay. And so his first, steps on the courts were on this surface, which for a lot of people can feel kind of hostile. I mean, I'm not sure Andre Agassi, even though he won the French Open, ever felt 100% comfortable on it, even into his 30s. So Rafa, that's the natural connection. And then you have the forehand, which is, one of the greatest shots in the history of sports, definitely of tennis. And it's just an incredibly heavy, powerful, yet reliable weapon because it has a lot of net clearance and incredible topspin. So it will dip down and then bounce up kind of like a second serve if you're a tennis player. It's a ground stroke that feels like a second serve. Many players describe facing it that way. So you're basically having to hit again and again against this grinding, wrenching spin. And sure, you can do it once or twice, but in Rafa rallies, he gets you in his grip and his grasp, and you have to do it again and again and again and again. And it's inevitable you're going to break down, or you're going to float a shot. It's going to end up sitting up for him, and he's going to rip the ball with his forehand any direction he wants. You cannot read it, and he will put you away. So that's the technical side. The mental side is clay is not quite what it was. The game is faster now. There's more homogeneous kind of character to tennis on different surfaces, but it's still different. You still have to use the geometry, use the angles, construct the point more on clay than any other surface. Cheap points are rare. The serve is a bit negated by the grittiness of the surface, which makes the serve pop up. So, really you have to be a tactician and still a bit of a grinder. And the mentality that goes with that is you have to really enjoy that process. So many tennis players, even at the highest level, are looking for the quick fix. They want the point to end. They want to use the power shot, use the technology and go for it and have it pay off. And some of these guys are great enough to do that some of the time. But on clay, it's just so much harder to sustain. And Nadal's mentality, the way he was raised, and probably the way someplace in his DNA he is he really learned or was the embodiment of embracing the point by point challenge of a clay court. And in terms of being able to really enjoy that it was hard, relish it, expect it. That's what his uncle kept telling him. You have to expect it's going to be hard, and you have to embrace it when it comes that way. And I think that combination of mentality and technique is unmatched. And then you also, I think, had to be able to find a way in terms of the philosophy of your sport to want to win the French Open, not 14 times, but every time you played it with the same power and passion. And therein lies the secret. You start counting in your head, oh, I've already won at 12. I'm going to go for 13. I don't think that works. And I honestly think Nadal kind of had temporary amnesia. He would just get into the tournament. It was this year's challenge, this year's thing in front of him, and he would play each of them as a set piece. And that's, I kind of realized that right in the book. I don't think I really realized that before. From all the interviews, kind of rewatching the matches, kind of going back through what he'd said to us and said to me through the years. And that's part of the secret sauce. And then you cannot forget that the guy is just an unbelievable athlete. He would have
Yeah.
been, I think, a Real Madrid striker for sure. Great left. He's got that mixed handedness, mixed footedness, left foot. He was so fast when he was young. So we can't forget outlier, just pure athlete. So I think all that came together for sure.
Yeah. Man, how lucky we were to witness it is really one of the big takeaways from reading. I was going to ask, you've spent so much time in not only interviewing Rafa but people around him. You've watched matches. I'm sure you've gone back and rewatched many of his matches. If you had to guess, if I said, Chris, what, nature versus nurture, would help settle the debate. Is it a 50-50 split when it comes to Rafa and his willingness to suffer and his almost desire to suffer and to go through the process? Where do you fall out on, you mentioned, is it the DNA? Is it Uncle Tony? If you had to like place a percentage on each, what would be your best guess?
That's a wonderful question. It really is because it hits a lot of different things. I think when I started the process, having covered him, day to day and been around him, I would have probably opted more for 75% nurture, 25% nature, maybe when I started. But as people I talked to, and the more I thought about it, it's Tony's methodology was tough and very effective. And I think if he hadn't been there and he hadn't applied all these things, we wouldn't have had this serial champion that we turned out to have in tennis with Rafa. But I do think that ultimately I was selling Rafa a little bit short. And I think not that there's any less value in not being nurtured or being able to develop, but I do think something in Rafa himself from the core was also very powerful here. And I think Tony coached a lot of guys. Rafa was not his first rodeo in
Yeah.
Mallorca, and he coached many young juniors and would coach some even a little bit afterward. And there's only one Rafa, so you had to have, and that's part of the perfect storm again. You had to have a young child who respected authority, but had that inner grit and strength to be able to handle it and accept it and not just reject it ultimately in his teens or at age 11 or 12 or break down mentally or find that it sort of in some ways kind of broke him down too much. And I think that says a lot about Rafa. So I think I'd probably go more 55 nurture and 45 nature now from having covered and talked about it so much for the book. Because I think Rafa
Yeah.
deserves probably more credit than he's been given, which is a strange thing to say, but I think there's been a very big Uncle Tony filter here and sort of, Rafa raised to be a champion and Rafa is a champion. And we should never forget that having gone through this research process.
One of the things I love is
One thing, so I mean, I'd love to hear just quickly from like Tiger, is Tiger
I
nature
know.
nurture? 'Cause I did think a lot. Rafa loves golf, as you know, and I just would be curious whether you think Tiger is how much of nurture and nature is Tiger.
It's kind of the one of the questions that fascinates me the most, and obviously there's no right answer. I mean, I guess I would just default to maybe half and half. I just think Tiger specifically well, it is a lot like Uncle Tony with
Yeah,
Rafa.
there are
It's like
parallels.
you can't, it just feels wrong to separate Tiger from his father Earl, right? And everything he was doing to train Tiger from, the time he could walk, I'm sure. Yeah, I guess I would, seems like the easy way out, but I guess I would put it like 50-50 maybe. But it's what fascinates me about any exceptional athlete or any exceptional talented person in any walk of life is trying to get at that, what were you born with? What was inevitable versus, how did your surroundings and circumstances play a part in it?
But I don't know if Earl
Mhm.
did this. you would know better than I would. I did cover a fair bit of Tiger, but I do think that one of Tony's genius moves was he sort of knew the breaking point, I think, and he had a mixture of kind of pleasure and pain that was involved. And I think Rafa had the mentality, but I think Tony did have a gift for instilling kind of a love of the challenge
Mm,
and a connection, a deep connection to the challenge. They use the word suffering a lot when you talk to the Nadals, but it's not really suffering if you're not suffering. And I don't
right.
think a lot of the
Yeah.
time that he was. So it was sort of, I think, a recognition of the value of difficulty. And I talked to some sports psychologists who know tennis very well, and one guy who I talked to a lot for the Master about Federer, who worked with Federer when he was young, and his perception of the Nadal dynamic was that was part of the genius of it, was that they were able to really instill this embrace of difficulty and expectation of it, which sounds
Yeah.
basic, but I think so few of us really do that. I think people tend to resist that and sort of hope it's not going to happen, but of course it's going to happen.
All right, everybody. Randy here. I'm going to jump in and thank another sponsor of today's podcast, and that is Oars and Alps. I feel like this is a great sponsor to be talking about with the subject of tennis. Okay, you're going to be outside, probably playing tennis. You're going to need to take care of of your skin. All right, we all do, whether it's tennis, golf, or you're just out and about this summer. The number one thing you can do for your skin's health is protect it from the sun. Oars and Alps makes sunscreen that you'll actually want to use from clean ingredients you can feel good about putting on your skin. Oars and Alps, the sunscreen, they solve for all the reasons you don't always like to wear sunscreen. You're not going to smell like a pina colada after using Oars and Alps, okay? Oars and Alps, it's lightweight, it's never greasy or sticky, and it won't leave a white cast or residue. It's simple, fast, easy to use, and most are travel friendly, so you can keep with you and reapply throughout the day. They have lots of hands free options. They have sprays, mist sticks, so you won't get sunscreen on your hands. But please, 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 if you're of my age, if you're of any age, taking care of your skin, making sure you're protected is of the utmost important. And men especially, we're not wearing enough sunscreen. Okay, it's degrading our health. Only 1 in 7 wear sunscreen daily. Golfers are 250% more likely to develop skin cancers, and skin cancer rates have risen 55% among men in the past decade. So by applying Oars and Alps, applying any sunscreen, you can reduce your risk of melanoma by up to 50%. So please, please, please take this seriously. You can go to oarsandalps.com. Oars is spelled OARS, oarsandalps.com. Take the skin quiz, build your own kit. It's a wonderful product. It's an important product. We thank them for sponsoring the trap draw. It's so much easier said than done. I mean, I'm just thinking I played a tennis match last night in a tournament here in Denver. And I was making mistakes. It was shocking how quickly I with this book fresh in my mind, I could sense my own kind of mental fortitude slipping, and I started negative talking myself, and I could just feel it spiraling without knowing how to pull myself out of it. It was, and of course, I ended up losing the match. Like I didn't deserve to win at all, and I just am out there thinking in a silly way, like God, this is like I have such an appreciation for a Nadal who,
Yep.
as you chronicle, will just fight point after point, and his ability to kind of put the past, leave it behind, and focus squarely in the present and the next point. It's I don't know. Obviously, that's what separates the greats from the schlubs like me. But it was fun to be in that environment and just be like, oh, I got no chance to kind of pull myself out of this. It
Well,
just kind of
because
underscored the whole book.
you and me, I mean, I played tennis a lot of my life, and I played today too, and I just didn't play up to my expectations. But we are retrofitting, Phil. We are
Yeah,
retrofitting. We're taking our flawed mentality and we're applying, some bandages to it in our later stages. But Rafa, that was the Nadal approach, and it was the right one from the start.
Yeah.
He didn't need to go back and retrofit. It was there, and so that's part of the secret to the success as well. Is that deep down there's that reliance in the method and that sense of having been in the present for a long time. But although there, if you read the book, some things that I discovered along the way, there were some changes that had to happen for Rafa
Hmm.
to find that right rhythm and routine, and that was surprising to me. I didn't realize that.
We mentioned Tiger. It just occurs to me another thing that I guess I'm a little surprised by, and the Rafa Nadal story is still ongoing, but Tiger kind of cracked, and we saw that play out in a number of public, I'll call them less than desirable incidents. And we really haven't seen that with Rafa Nadal. And I guess that surprises me a little bit too. And credit to his family and his circumstances. And again, credit to him, the person that he is. But I'm a little timid because, again, in 3 years, this could look terrible. But it is surprising that he can push himself this hard and he can get pushed this hard, and man, he just seems like a normal guy. And I think maybe more than anything, that's God, credit to Tony, credit to his parents, credit to everybody that helped in that regard. Because I feel like with Tiger, you tend to get there's going to be a bill to pay at some point, and I hope Rafa, I hope he's escaped that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak to Tiger's upbringing. I don't know enough to know, but what's clear is that a lot of top athletes, there's a sense that there are a lot of yeses being directed their way, and they're catered to from an early age when they're outliers, and there's a sense, sometimes it's important to succeed as well in your sport to feel like you are the center of the universe a little bit. That's the interesting thing about Nadal is that because of his background and because of the family environment and the influence of the family, and a lot of his closest friends are the guys he grew up with in Mallorca. Even though let's not embellish it. He has a very nice boat and he has a very, very nice house
Sure.
on a beautiful cliff in Porto Cristo, which is a little port town very close to Manacor. So the man is not suffering in the lifestyle department, no question about it. So we shouldn't, think of Rafa in some fisherman's shack doing his penitence. He's not. So he's getting the fruits of his labor, and he has a very big academy as well with all the latest bells and whistles. But the way he projects himself, and I've been around him enough and seen him enough and talked to enough people, he knows how to treat people with dignity and to respect everybody's role in their lives. And he will put on the galoshes if there's a flood in Mallorca and go out there and help clean up the mud and do all these things. And I don't think he's doing it for a photo op. I really don't. But it's interesting. Like Rafa has had a very clean sheet, like I said before. So when something comes up like him taking money from the Saudis, which happened near the end of
Yeah.
his career, and something that seemed to me very unnecessary for him to do, but he made that move. It kind of lands even harder because wow, that's not the Rafa that I would expect in that
Mhm.
situation, and yet there it was. So, it's obviously he's hardly alone in taking Saudi money, and golf is full of people who have. But it just seemed like that was an interesting thing because it was kind of one of the very first sort of major things that came along that sort of put Rafa a little bit in a different light, and it surprised me. I can tell you that when I heard about that, I thought, wow, I didn't think he'd do that. So there always are elements, but I just say from everything that I've seen and heard and watched, it's been an impressive run and not easy to do under the spotlight. You need your values need to be real for that to work.
Well, towards the end of the book as well, we bring in Carlos Alcaraz, and I was hoping to just pick your brain a little bit. One of the themes with Rafa is he didn't want to be boxed in as a clay court specialist. He fought and worked to shed that really his entire career. And not that Alcaraz is a is a clay court specialist, but I did find it a little interesting. Rafa wasn't maybe the guy he looked up to. You made mention that he had a Federer poster in his bedroom growing up. What do you think's ahead for a Carlos Alcaraz in terms of is he just going to be compared to Rafa? Do you think his entire career? Does he have a chance to really carve out a unique identity? And Also, like Christopher, a couple of years on since we last talked, like how good do you think he can be? Is
Mm.
he as special as he's shown thus far?
I wish I could recall what I told you a couple of years ago about Alcaraz. I hope I got it right. I don't even remember what I said, but anyway,
The
yeah. I mean,
past is the past. Yeah, no, we won't. You know, who? I'll just say,
you
I'm
quizzed me.
sure he was smart
You
and
asked me a
well
couple years.
informed.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
You asked me a couple of years ago who would win which majors, and you gave me like Zverev and Medvedev and
yeah.
everybody, and so it was a great exercise. But Alcaraz, I think he looked up to Rafa. Rafa was not his pure role model, and if you
Okay.
follow tennis and you watch tennis, which I know you do, you would understand why. Because Carlos is a shot maker and an entertainer at heart. He is sort of Federer with a much more expansive version of Federer in a sense. And he can hit any shot. He obviously has a two-handed backhand, not a one-hander. But I think Rogers' sort of shot-making showmanship and crowd pleasing really appealed to Carlos and sort of hits a lot of the same buttons that he's able to hit. And that being said, you don't grow up in Spain when the most prominent athlete in your country in a soccer country happens to be a tennis player and it's Nadal, and you're playing in his junior sponsored tournaments as a kid and hearing Nadal, 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 and watching him on TV every spring and every summer. So for sure he's an influence, and Carlos would never say he wasn't. But was he the pure role model? No, I don't think he was. And I mean, when I first interviewed Alcaraz in depth at the academy where Ferrero has his academy in near Alicante a few years ago, it was the Federer picture on the wall. It wasn't Nadal, but obviously very respectful of Rafa and all that. So, and now he's gotten to know Rafa, so maybe his perspective has changed. But there's a little bit of revisionist history maybe there on some of that stuff. But I totally understand why there would be. But Carlos hits buttons that Nadal does not. Nadal's maybe more of a, you could say, really early in Rafa's career with the flashy over the head finish on the forehand and the long hair and the sleeveless shirts and the clam digger pants and all that sort of stuff, and just the very kind of the brio in his tennis, spectacular to watch, but not really a pure acrobat dancer type like a Federer or an Alcaraz can be. And I think he is. It's sort of dead serious with Rafa. It's serious business. It is. It is.
Yeah.
It is battle. It is battle.
Yeah.
And Alcaraz, it is not that. Alcaraz, it's more of a spectacle. And that may be the essential difference. And that makes me think that there's not going to be 14 French Opens in Carlos Alcaraz's future, because I don't think, if you don't have all those elements, it's not going to happen. But he has a good chance to win quite a few of everything. He is such a phenomenal talent. But he's also up against some pretty strong guys in his generation. I mean, Yannick Sinner is a fantastic ball striker, and he seems like a self-optimizer type. Obviously, he's coming back from a doping suspension of 3 months, and we'll see how that all plays out. But Sinner is a thunderous ball striker, and I think has that sort of curve evolution that's going to be interesting for a guy like Alcaraz, who's going to be inevitably more like that, like a
Mm.
sine curve in his progression. But when everything's firing, I mean, he's one of the best shows in sports. I think you would agree.
Oh,
You can't take your eyes off him. He's hitting
no.
shots and creating shots that others cannot create. He is just incredibly quick, and he's airborne, and gives you he gives you personality. He reacts to what is happening. I don't always love when he does that. It's a little bit of showing up his opponent once in a while, but he's connecting to people. And Rafa, it was more the internal thing that was going on with him. He was fighting Rafa fighting Rafa to get the best out of Rafa. Alcaraz, it's very external. And even though
Mm.
Federer didn't show it, Federer was quite external as well. And Federer had to lock down all those, as you remember from our discussion about Federer's career. He was a hothead as a youngster and had to
Yeah.
tamp it down, much like Bjorn Borg did. So, and Alcaraz is less crazy exuberant than he was, but I think he'll always have that readability, which makes him very accessible. So, but if everything he stays healthy with his style of play, that's no given. He's extreme positions. He's all over the place. He sort of can make the easy shot or make the hard shot look easy, but also the easy shot look hard. And he kind of likes making the easy shot look hard. So I don't personally see 22 Grand Slams in Alcaraz's future, but I see quite a few.
Do, this is an impossible question, but it just is unbelievable that the big three came together. Djokovic, Nadal, Federer, they all have won over 20 Grand Slam titles apiece. Is is men's tennis, as we are kind of getting out of the big three, Djokovic still active. Wouldn't count him out necessarily at any event that he was healthy and playing in. Does tennis need to get more men's tennis need more parity in your opinion? I guess where do you see the men's game going over the next 5 years? Or is it going to be like Alcaraz, Sinners, Vera? Are we always going to have some form of either a big two, big three, big four, whatever that number is?
Hmm. Yeah, I wrote this the other day on my news in my newsletter, Tennis and Beyond, if I can. It's been fun to write for that. I wrote basically that surprise is great, but parity is not in tennis. Parity is
Yeah.
not great in tennis. I really don't think it is. I think people need to dig into something. And if you have a different winner every time, or too many different winners, or no reliability in the rivalries, which has really hurt the women's game in the last
Mm.
30 years or so, since honestly, Everett Navratilova or Graf Celis, there just hasn't been enough of that. And I think the men's game has had just an abundance, golden age of it, which has been fantastic. So a little more surprise. Okay, we don't need to have three guys dominating to the degree that they did, with a little bit of Murray and Wawrinka and Del Potro sprinkled in. But we definitely, I think, need in tennis some core characters who you can depend on to be reliably there. And I think that's really important, because I think the rivalries and the suspense of that and the evolution of that really is what drives a lot of the interest in the sport, because you get into a personality, somebody you want to connect with and be part of the tribe, but you want to see your tribe go up against somebody else's tribe. And so that was the beauty of Federer, Nadal, and Nadal Djokovic, and Djokovic Federer, and all the back and forth. There were three of them, so you had enough variety. I don't know, you can't do it with Arnold Palmer, Nicholas, and Gary Player, but you can do it with tennis players because they're playing each other directly. And so I think that was the beauty of it. There were just enough, and some nice outliers like Murray and Wawrinka and Del Potro, occasionally Chilich or a Songa to make it interesting. But you had this core thing. Will we get that again? I guess it's possible. I mean, you look at Alcaraz and Sinner certainly have that outlier quality to them, and you got a guy like Jakub Menchik, who just won the Miami Open, who's coming up at age 19, who's got an awfully big game. You got a guy like Jack Draper, who's a little bit older from Britain, who's got a chance to have some staying power. But I think you need three really solid ones to have the
Mm.
ideal microclimate. But I do think, like I said, surprise great, parity not great.
Everybody, quick ad break here. I want to get a word in from our friends at Omni Hotels and Resorts, the official hotel of No Laying Up. The first major is in the books. We're coming up on the second, which can only mean one thing, guys. Spring golf. It's officially here. There's no better time to start planning your next bucket list golf trip. One course that we want to put on your radar, it's the newly renovated Oak Marsh Golf Course down in Amelia Island Resort and Spa. I've actually played this course pre-renovation. Would love to get down there now post-renovation. It's officially reopening for public play this month. And this course has been refreshed by Bo Welling Design to honor Pete Dye's iconic original layout while bringing it up to speed for the modern game. It's nestled over 1,300 acres of oceanfront property in Northeast Florida. It's a $7.4 million renovation. It features rebuilt greens, repositioned bunkers, expanded native areas, and flexible new ribbon tee system offering nearly unlimited teeing options. So whether you're in it for the views, the challenge, or the history, this is one you won't want to miss. And speaking of iconic venues, the countdown to the NCAA championships at Omni La Costa's famed North Course is officially on. That's coming up really starting at the end of this week. May 17th, we'll start the women's championship, and it'll run through May 29th with the men's championship. We're going to get to see the top collegiate players take on a layout brought back to life by Gil Hanse in a stunning 2024 renovation. With 13 Omni golf destinations and 28 courses and short courses at your disposal, what are you waiting for? Head to omnihotels.com/golf to play the possibilities. Now back to our conversation. I was going to ask, not the best player, who's your favorite player or players to watch and why right now?
Well, honestly, I mean, we just talked about it for a while, but I mean, Alcaraz is not. There's no.
Yeah.
I have no allegiance to anybody. I'm a reporter and observer, but I mean, when you watch Alcaraz, you don't feel like you're working.
Yeah.
It's just pure pleasure to watch somebody create tennis shots the way that he does.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And honestly, I also, this is going to surprise people, but I mean, I was a serve and volleyer, a mediocre one in my Division III college days, and I grew up in Southern California and Hawaii, so I was fast courts and Russian. So I kind of like watching a guy like Ben Shelton
Mm.
from the States, a lefty with his massive serve, which is so explosive and kind of crazy corkscrew ability to generate pace. I kind of like watching him try to develop into a champion because he's playing aggressive tennis. He's trying to come in and use his weapons. So I really enjoy watching, Ben's either progression or regression on a week to week basis. Plus, I know him; he's got a lot of personalities that comes through on the court. He's not a beautiful player or a balletic player like an Alcaraz, but he has a lot of impact visually when you watch him play. I like watching Tommy Paul a lot too. I enjoy
I
watching
do
Tommy
too.
Paul.
I do too.
Tommy Paul is an aficionado's tennis player. He's a subtle vibe. You have to, I think, really have watched a lot to appreciate him. But he can do so many things. He is deceptively quick. He's got phenomenal ball striking ability, and he can play anywhere in the court. He uses the whole canvas. I don't think he's going to be necessarily a Grand Slam champion, outside chance, but he's a great talent and really a blast to watch because he just uses all the shots and he can really adapt his tactics. And he has a great coach in Brad Stein who's encouraged that, but it comes from Tommy. Those are just three. There are many. And
Yeah.
on the women's side, I find Coco Gauff frustrating because of the battles with the forehand and the serve, but what a phenomenal mover and competitor she is. But I guess if I'm talking about players that I really enjoy watching on the women's side, I tend to opt for all court players. So
Mm.
I'm sorry to see Ons Jabeur sort of fall back. Players who use the slice, who can come to net, use the drop shot. I'm sad that Ash Barty's not playing anymore. I mean, I really enjoyed those kind of players who can use it all. So, um, yeah, Vondrosova, who won Wimbledon by surprise. Those are kind of the people that I like to watch.
Yeah. Well, if you don't mind me changing gears just a little bit, Nadal is the subject of the book, but I think the real secondary subject, and it's an undercurrent throughout, is Roland Garros, the French Open, and really French tennis in a lot of ways as well. Do you mind kind of tipping a little bit just the history of why the French Open has ended up our clay court Grand Slam, and also just I don't want to ask too broad of a question, but just a little bit, I guess, about the history of the French Open and how it has kind of come to take its place among the other Grand Slams. And I
Well,
apologize, that is a very broad question.
no, no, I'm delighted that to talk about this because I feel like the book is, it's probably 2/3 Rafa and 1/3 French Open and clay and all these things. It's a huge part of the book for sure. And honestly, I learned so much myself, even having been there 30 plus times and having covered so many Roland Garroses. I learned a great deal myself in the reporting and research process. But I mean, it's interesting to think about why are these four Grand Slams? Why do these four get to be the Grand Slams?
Right.
And the actual reason, sure, Wimbledon was the first and is still the kind of the oldest tournament of any consequence in tennis. Dates back to the 19th century, and the other ones came more toward the end of the 19th century. But it really ultimately got cemented by an event that has lost its luster, which is Davis Cup. Davis Cup is the biggest team event in tennis still. There are some other ones that have arrived, but Davis Cup was right on a par in the early 20th century and the first half of it really with Wimbledon and the U.S. championships. You can't call it the U.S. Open until 1968 when they allowed everybody to play, including the pros. So it's the U.S. championships and the Australian championships and the French championships until 68 when everything became open. But the Davis Cup nations, the ones who dominated the Davis Cup competition, Davis Cup began in 1900 and it was kind of in that moment in time when there was the America's Cup of Sailing and these sort of international trophies. A lot of them were British Isles versus the U.S., tapping into that rivalry. And when it emerged in those early years, the best nations were the Americans, the Australians, the Brits with Fred Perry, who's better known as a clothing brand now, but was a great tennis player, and the French. And the French, who actually the first time they won the Davis Cup, this very prestigious headline grabbing event that dominated discussion about sports in these countries was in 1927 when they were playing against Big Bill Tilden and the Americans in the United States at Germantown Cricket Club, and they had fought and tried to win this Davis Cup thing many, many times. They had kept failing, and they finally broke through and won. And the French had turned it into kind of this national quest. And the men who were involved in the quest became known as the Musketeers. Not terribly original for a French group of players, but that's what it was. And so you had Rene Lacoste, who became Lacoste in everybody's mind, the crocodile and the clothing brand. Jean Barotro was the bounding Basque who wore a beret when he played. Henri Cochet, who was the magician, a little man from Lyon who was a fantastic shot maker. And then there was sort of more the double specialist, who was Jacques Brugnon, Toto Brugnon. So these four guys were the four Musketeers. And they brought this Davis Cup, which was one of the most prestigious things in world sport at the time, back to France because the nation who won it was able to defend it. And they had this fantastic event, and they had nowhere really of proper size or grandeur to host it. So they decided to build, with the land available where Roland Garros is today, they decided to build this stadium in a big hurry in time for 1928 to defend the Davis Cup. This all sounds a bit crazy today because people don't really, in our country especially, don't really follow the Davis Cup anymore. But it was a big deal back then. It was kind of peak Ryder Cup in some ways. You want to compare it to golf, huge level of focus. And they hosted the competition. And if you won it in those days, you didn't have to play round after round. You got to wait for everybody to kind of fight among themselves. And then you played the winner in a challenge round match. So they were guaranteed to play this match in Roland Garros. They built it in time to host the French Championships, which later became the French Open, and they also had the Davis Cup. So these two events were held at Roland Garros Stadium, which had makeshift wooden stands, some of which caught on fire actually in the initial year. And France by then had developed a culture of red clay, and the story of that is quite interesting. I go into that in detail in the book.
Yeah.
Things I didn't realize, and it's still not entirely clear like where the first red clay courts were and how they were formed. But France by then in the 20s had, in this golden age of sport in the 20s, had taken over the red clay mantle. So the first Roland Garros was played there in 1928, and the Davis Cup was more important in many people's eyes actually, and that was held, and the French defended it, and they were able to defend it multiple times until the Brits and Fred Perry finally took it away in the 30s.
I
How's that
wonder it's shot.
overarching sort of thing,
Yeah,
right?
it's a much better answer than the question I asked you. So I appreciate it. It is surprising that the Davis Cup isn't more popular because I immediately I associate kind of with the Ryder Cup. What do you make of that? Is it the only thing I could think of is, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the Davis Cup is an annual event. Would it benefit by, maybe being every other year or every 4 years? Do you think it maybe needs a bit of scarcity now to kind of, I don't know, re-energize?
I think back in those golden years that we were discussing, would you have had Wimbledon every other year? Would you have had the U.S. Championships every other year? Probably not. So there weren't as many big events in those days. So it was kind of a pillar of the calendar. So in those years, okay, annual was good. But I would certainly argue in this glut of tennis, in which we live, and we have lived for several decades now, since the 70s, then absolutely it would benefit from being a biennial competition like the Ryder Cup or the President's Cup. And there has been a lot of discussion about that. The problem
Mm.
is tennis, with all its infighting and its alphabet soup of organizations who run it. Obviously with Live and the PGA Tour, a bit about that in golf now, but tennis has been a specialist in that for far too long. And the International Tennis Federation, which sort of governs the sport worldwide, is the Olympic Federation. This is their big cash cow. Davis Cup is what funds the International Tennis Federation, and they've never been able to come upon a model that would allow them to host it every other year or space it out and still run their organization in the manner in which they are accustomed. So it's really kind of an economic obstacle, not a necessarily optimization obstacle. So, but I think you're right; it would be benefit from scarcity, like a lot of things in world sport would. But a couple of things happened. And I'm not going to make this into a Davis Cup lecture. Nobody wants that. But the fact of it is, I think there has been so much tennis. The top players had their to pick and choose, and they all wanted to win the Davis Cup for their country. But did they need to win it multiple times? I mean, Rafa ended up doing it. Rafa ended up being part of 5 winning teams. So to his credit, Spain, it was a big deal. And in some countries, it still is a very big deal. Argentina, France, Spain, places like that. But I think a lot of the top players, Borg being one of the first, once was enough. Once they did it, they kind of
Mhm.
checked it off, and they just sort of focused on individual things. And the other thing is, you compare it to Ryder Cup. What is the core of the Ryder Cup rivalry? It's intercontinental, right? But it's also
Right.
your tour. You have the European tour at the base. This has changed a bit over in recent times, but traditionally, European tour, the underdog tour against the PGA tour, and that's kind of what drove it was the tour rivalry. Davis Cup isn't like that. There's no tour rivalry to drive it, and Europe has
Yeah.
been so dominant, and these individual nations all kind of want to win it, but it's kind of lost. But I always say if Federer and Nadal and Djokovic had all played it, and they all wanted it at different times, but they never, unfortunately, played it with vigor and full investment at the same time, really, and they never clashed. There was, I think, Djokovic and Nadal might have played once. Federer and Nadal never played in Davis Cup, and the matches between Federer and Djokovic came very, very early in Djokovic's career. So, in this amazing golden era of men's tennis, Davis Cup never got the payoff of the rivalries bleeding into the Davis Cup, and that perhaps could have lifted it again and helped it. And I'm not writing it off for good because there's a lot of value, and honestly, a lot of the best things I covered as a tennis writer in my many years doing this were Davis Cup matches, just in terms of the emotion that it creates. But I think it's just there's just too much tennis, and it hasn't been properly managed, unfortunately.
Yeah. Everything is cyclical. And speaking of cycles, I was curious your take on what you've seen. How has France as a nation evolved with their interest in the game of tennis? And I only ask that because we have to go back to 1983 now on the men's side, the last French man, Yannick Noah, to win the French Open. How much does that pain Parisians and French people? And is tennis has tennis waned at all in popularity over there? Or how big of a deal is tennis in France?
I think that's a maddening state of affairs for them. It's a maddening stat. And you have this annual showcase of Roland Garros, and nobody's won it since '83 on the men's side. You have had a woman win it. Mary Pierce won it, but she was sort of half American, half French, but representing France. So that, and then you had she was the last French player to win the singles there. But it's been that since '83 for the men, and Noah was such a huge personality and huge figure there. He's one of the most charismatic athletes I've ever covered. So that's also part of it. It's like the golden days and the good old days in this case really kind of were the good old days. And the French obviously had some great players in the era of the big three. You had their own new musketeers with Songa and Simon and Gasquet and Monfils, but none of them were able to get it done in terms of winning a major. Songa came closest, Aussie Open final, but none of them were able to do it. And it's an annual, almost monthly subject of discussion in the French sports newspapers, and a lot of hair pulling about why it hasn't happened, because the French Federation is one of the wealthiest and best run federations in terms of coaching and development of talent. But you can, I think, plan for top 100 players, but you cannot plan for a superstar Grand Slam champion. Things have to come together, like we said with Nadal and the perfect storm and those sorts of things. You can't plan for that. All you can do is plant a lot of seeds and hope that some of those seeds grow into that sort of thing. So the French have had lots of fine players, but they haven't had a truly transcendent player since Noah. And Noah, let's not forget, only won one major.
Yeah, I
He
know.
won the right one. He did it at the right time, and we'll never forget it. Those of us who follow the sport, but only one. So the French, with their investment in tennis and the importance of it, and it has slipped a little bit from the kind of the tennis boom years, but they're still over a million card carrying members in a country of 60 million or more, which is quite a good figure, and it's still taught at a very high level, and it's still a big part of French society.
Yeah.
The pickleball, Phil, is coming. Le pickle is on its
Are
way.
you a pickleball player?
I have played, but I'm still a tennis player at heart, and I play a lot of
Yeah,
platform tennis, which is the winter game, which is
sure.
kind of like padel. But Le pickle is just starting in France, so you never know what can happen.
I have resisted pickle so far. I want to be a tennis player until the body will not allow me to be a tennis player, but hopefully that's a long way off. Christopher, I was going to say maybe a one prediction, put you on the spot to get you out of here. Give me your best prediction, and women's winners at the French Open later this month.
Wow. I'm so much better at kind of very casually analyzing after the fact than I am at predicting anything. The Brits are always big on this. Oh, what's your best guess? Well, I'll guess. It's not going to be my best anything, but you know, it's I always try to have a little fun with this. I mean, I feel like on the men's side, clay is not Sinner's best surface. If Sinner's in full continuity mode, maybe he can lift and win the French. I don't think it's going to happen this year. Alcaraz has been really up and down, has been a bit injury prone, has had some crisis of confidence and losing. I feel like it's kind of a year for a diesel instead of a Ferrari, maybe to pull it out.
Mm.
So, and it was really nice to see Casper Ruud kind of rise and win in Madrid, even though it's a bit of a altitude tournament, so it's not the purest comparison to the French Open. All things being equal, talent and ability, Alcaraz should win. But I'm gonna sort of say I'm gonna go with a little Casper Ruud and say maybe Casper Ruud can find a way best of five with his recent rise in form. He's been a finalist there a couple times, had tough final draws there with Djokovic and Nadal. So things have changed. So he could be a year for a guy like Casper to win it. And on the women's side, I'm going to go with Sabalenka just because I feel like Sabalenka's had such a wonderful season, has been there almost in every big tournament except for the Middle East swing after the Australian. She is not doesn't have the ideal game for clay, a little low clearance on the net, but she has become a much better mover and a fighter. And I don't think Iga is going to win this year. And I think Sabalenka has the game and has a baseline of tennis now to pull it off.
There you have it, folks. We'll see how good his best predictions are in just a couple weeks. Christopher, thank you very much for coming back on. Some of my favorite conversations I get to do. The book is The Warrior, Rafael Nadal and His Kingdom of Clay. Get it wherever you get your books. It's available May 13th. The natural thing, Christopher, in a couple of years, we're all expecting the Djokovic biography now. We got to complete the triumvirate.
I got to find the right format and the right way to do it. So, because let me tell you, as you know, you live with these things in your head. I mean, you already cover these guys for 20 years. You want to have a structure and an idea you can really enjoy and dig into. So, yeah, I'm certainly thinking about it. It's a question that comes up all the time. It would be a good trilogy, but I'm only going to do it if I have something fresh and good to bring to it.
Very good. Very good. We will end it there. Thank you, Christopher. Enjoy the French Open.
Always a pleasure. Thanks so much.